From an exciting story timed just perfectly to the real reason why everyone loves The Last of Us, here's how the show avoided The Walking Dead's biggest problem. Starting with how The Last of Us kept tight plots and a fast pace in a way that The Walking Dead didn't. For the show, the video game origin meant that the narrative had to be incredibly exciting. One of the primary criticisms about it is that it doesn't have enough zombies for a horror show about zombies. That's true, but it also shows that the zombies aren't the main focus here. The end of the world is only the backdrop for the primary storyline, not the narrative itself, and the story hasn't been afraid to show that people are the actual threat. Villains like Kathleen and David show up and receive the attention they deserve in one episode or less. Also, the story of Ellie and Joel is built around how they interact with other people. This makes the side characters just as interesting as the major ones. Arcs like Bill and Frank and Henry and Sam's are wonderful examples, since they serve the plot and help Ellie and Joel go on whether they're friends or enemies. All of this is because these characters have to fit within a story that follows the same rules as the game. There are certain differences, but in the end, they all follow the same rules set by the original material, and that's where The Walking Dead goes wrong. It has extensive plot arcs that occasionally focused on just one character for many episodes. Brief arcs from the comics, like The Governors, were dragged out across full seasons, which were totally unnecessary. As a result, we got episodes that may have been important to the tale, but they may have been more interesting if they focused on more than one character. It's exciting to try to figure out what makes a character tick. They're at the heart of what makes a great show, and The Walking Dead had a lot of interesting characters at first. Then it forgot how to keep them interesting. With so many new characters joining the main cast and earning so much screen time, the show was almost unrecognizable by the conclusion for anybody who'd followed it from the beginning. In the end, though, it all came down to what the zombie horror genre is about. The key difference between these two series is that the end of the world isn't meant to be the end, but to demonstrate how short life actually is. The Last of Us makes its characters confront their problems and move on. Meanwhile, The Walking Dead pushed everything as far as it could, and ended up losing itself as it tried to tread the line between good and evil for no reason. But it isn't just about the timing and pace. There are many reasons why this show comes out on top compared to the older one. There's good reason to believe The Last of Us might be the better show.
Of them all. You plan stuff?
Now that the first season's over, it's a good opportunity to look back at the HBO show and look at how it stacks up to previous zombie horror classics. The most common comparison is of course always going to be The Walking Dead, and it's easy to see why. Both shows are based on well-known works from different media companies, and both were the talk of the town while they were on TV, so it's only natural to compare them and see which one wins. There are a lot of parallels between the two shows, but most people think that The Last of Us is better than its rival. The stories of both shows are similar in the way they emphasize on how people are the primary threat after the end of the world, even when zombies are strolling about. This idea and their interesting main characters are what made them popular. But there are big differences in how each one uses its unique storyline to explore the same topic. Still, most people agree that The Last of Us is better than The Walking Dead since it doesn't make as many of the faults that TWD did. You might be wondering, what exactly was this major problem? Well, to understand that, let's look at where both shows started from. Their platforms and stories are both important. A live-action version of The Last of Us had been going about for a long time before HBO picked it up. It was almost made into a movie with a very different tone by Screen Gems, but the project was abandoned. When HBO chose to make the project, they called in Neil Druckmann, who was one of the developers of the first Naughty Dog game, and Craig Mazin, who'd worked with HBO to make the successful program Chernobyl. The two people were given the job of putting the game on TV in the way that HBO premium cable shows usually do. Meanwhile, The Walking Dead is one of AMC's most popular shows adapted from comics. And it was nothing like the version of Robert Kirkman's comics once it was adapted into a TV show. The show had to work with longer seasons with mid-season and season finales, and there was no end in sight because the original comic hadn't ended when it aired on TV. That's why The Walking Dead's more like Game of Thrones than The Last of Us.
Let him go.
The authors had to prepare to fill in holes that the original story didn't cover. But the stories weren't the only problem that affected the performance of both shows. You can't compare these two shows without taking their platforms and timing into account. They were also launched at different times and in different industries. For The Walking Dead, cable TV was the norm. That meant seasons had to last for a long time. But The Last of Us came out when everyone was streaming. So the way we consume content kind of changed. Now, for example, HBO has limited seasons for most of its shows. And that's all because of streaming. It's all about keeping a steady supply of shows. While The Last of Us does air at the same time on both HBO and HBO Max, the point is that it was made for streaming. Meanwhile, the other show was made for a totally different medium of entertainment. Now, The Walking Dead is trying to keep up with what's going on in the entertainment world. It's got a number of spin-offs, some of which are already finished and others are still in the works. None of them have been as popular as the main show, though. And the fact that it had a lot of ups and downs over its time on TV shows how much it was influenced by the way the TV business was evolving. The length and timing of the two shows still wouldn't matter if it wasn't for this next thing. It was all about staying true to the source material. The Last of Us and The Walking Dead being on separate platforms has its own set of problems, but there's also the fact that they're based on different books. A comic book isn't at all like a video game. And that difference has to be taken into consideration while adapting. The game will take around 14 hours to finish. Meanwhile, The Walking Dead comics have been going for 16 years. There will be differences between the original and the screen version, and that's to be expected. Of course, that also affected how the shows were executed and why one was better than the other. So that's all for how The Last of Us avoided The Walking Dead's biggest mistake.